dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andrew back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and we continue our conversation with Liberty Nation's economics editor, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for sticking around, Andrew. So earlier in
Yes, again.
Buenos dias again. Earlier in the show we were obviously talking Venezuela and the oil and how this might impact the U.S. economy. But let's spread this a little further, Andrew. I know that you're, as is your wont, you're always keen to talk about petrodollars.
So you asked me earlier in the segment about what the first thing I thought of when it comes to regime change in Venezuela, and of course oil and the critical minerals. But the other aspect is the petrodollar. I think that's one of the factors behind this regime change operation as well in Venezuela, because you want oil still priced in dollars, and in recent years. Venezuela has been working more with China and selling more of its oil to China and Russia. And one of the big initiatives from China over the last several years has been the de-dollarization, where they want to have more bilateral trade settled in local currencies. For China, it's of course settled in the yuan. Excuse me. So if you're having more trade settled in local currencies as opposed to the U.S. dollar, then that would threaten the dollar hegemony. Now, of course, at the same time, we've seen this over the past decade of the whole de-dollarization concern and the dollar hegemony under threat. So far, you look at, let's say, the payment structure, the U.S. dollar is still the king currency of the world. But still, obviously, there's still a threat to it if more countries long-term are not settling their transactions in dollars and settling more in rubles or reals, Brazilian reals or Chinese yuan. So I think that was an interesting aspect of this conversation.
Yeah, with what's happening in Venezuela then, there's going to be, because the first people through the door in terms of investment are going to be U.S. companies, and it serves their interest to keep the U.S. dollar as the top dog in the currency markets. So that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if there's a massive centralization of U.S. dollar trading within Venezuela, that's going to kind of spread out through much of South America, isn't it? Because, nations aren't isolated by themselves. And so more and more trades outside of Venezuela in the surrounding countries, which, as you point out, there's been a big push to get them to, especially from China, to get them to use other currencies. And I know they say, well, we do it in local currencies. What's the local currency? It's the Chinese yuan. No matter where you are in the world, it's the Chinese yuan.
Yeah, if you look at Argentina over the past, let's say, 15 years, before Milei arrived to the scene, Argentina did a lot of business with China, and it still does continue. It still does business with China based on soybean exchanges. But one thing that happened in Argentina, because of the collapse of the peso, there was greater transactions also occurring in the Chinese yuan. But over the past, let's say, 2 years, there's been a political shift going on across South America. And that is that a lot of countries are adopting conservative policies. You're having a lot of conservative leaders. You saw this in El Salvador. You saw this in Chile. Maybe, who knows, before this regime change, maybe you would have seen it also in Venezuela under the new opposition that would have been backed by the West. But whatever the case, it's turning conservative. So if you're having a more conservative, U.S. friendly part of the world, then of course, yes, you're going to have more dollar denominated trade. Plus, Trump threatened during the campaign that if anyone abandons the dollar or embraces anti-dollar policies, then he would impose tariffs on those countries that did it. So this regime change operation, is really dollar friendly.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is, as discussed, this spreading out all throughout South America. And then, of course, South America trades with other countries, and they don't want to get hit by those tariffs, because if we know one thing for sure, it's that if Donald Trump says he's going to put tariffs on somebody, he's probably going to put tariffs on them. And, at least until he gets blocked by some random courthouse in Connecticut. So there's going to be a big push to get involved in the US dollar. Now, what will that push for more dollar hegemony do for the average American back home? Or is this just a purely an internationalist
Yeah. Because when it comes to de-dollarization and dollar, in global transactions, it doesn't really affect foreign exchange markets. So, for example, the U.S. dollar index, or even the trade weighted average index, they price the U.S. dollar against, let's say, the Japanese yen or the euro or in your case the British pound. But when it comes to, let's say, the international settlements, that's not going to really impact day-to-day foreign exchange markets, because if you look at some economists call the Mar-a-Lago Accord. It's the idea is that the U.S. administration wants to weaken the U.S. dollar to bolster U.S. exports, and in a way, and you've seen that happen over the past year. The U.S. dollar weakened about 10%, and the trade weighted average index that fell about 7%, and at the same time, you're seeing an increase in U.S. exports. So that's the case. But overall, the whole idea about the war on the U.S. dollar is international supremacy. The joke is that the United States doesn't need to bomb countries. It just needs to impose its will for the U.S. dollar. And that's how strong the U.S. dollar is the world, no matter what you say about the Federal Reserve and its inflation, the U.S. dollar is king for a reason.
Andrew, I can't let you get away without talking about the critical minerals that are set to be exploited by all and sundry, I guess, down in Venezuela.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one thing. Everyone's talking about oil and natural gas, but the critical minerals are also a huge part especially for the Trump administration. Silver, bauxites, copper. I mean, Venezuela has massive gold deposits, and all these minerals are going to prove essential for Trumponomics 2.0's next generation economy, robotics, AI, data centers. All these things need critical minerals. And now, Trump had that deal with Ukraine to exploit about half of its critical minerals for the exact same things that happened with Venezuela, which is, I think, is around $2 trillion worth of critical minerals.
That might be just enough gold in Venezuela to plate the new West Wing ballroom at the White House. Andrew Moran, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Gracias.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.